Hey, hi, hello. Welcome to Diana Emerson. Today we're listening to Murder Under the Friday Night Lights. And this is the Muck Bowl Murder.
The Muck Bowl is by far one of the biggest rivalries in the state, if not the country.
But there's some of them that take it too far with the rivalry.
The Pahokee High School football star was wearing his school colors.
There were a number of people that said that he was killed because of his involvement with Pahokee football.
They trying to kill as much of our football players as possible.
My brother did not deserve this. He was a church member, family person.
I see him walking up to the car. Boom, boom, boom.
People didn't know who these young men were.
What's going on? Like, how could you just get away with murder just like that?
The night of September 26th was our homecoming game. It was a huge game. It was a beautiful sky, the lights, and just everybody in the stands and the band.
It's a big game. We're undefeated. We're playing Jupiter for our homecoming. Norman Griffith was an outstanding player. Typically, guys have nicknames, and everybody called him Pooh.
Jones in the middle. When he put the pads on and the helmet on, he was about business. You know, I feel bad for the linemen that really have to block him because he was explosive. You know, he's coming full force and he's not playing with you.
So the night of homecoming, Pooh was playing lights out. He was making big plays, sacking the quarterback. He was on fire. But at the end of the game, he got a flag that was not, in our eyes, a legitimate flag. It was unintentional hit.
Personal foul penalty against the Blue Devils.
And he was ejected from the football game. If that ejection stood up, then Pooh would have been out of games for 2 to 6 weeks.
We've won, but there was a cloud over it because we lost one of our biggest players, and we were supposed to be playing Burns the following week, and that was a nationally televised game on ESPN.
There were going to be a lot of scouts at the game. You know, a lot of exposure that you wouldn't get on a typical Friday night playing the game.
I vividly remember him coming up to me after the game, Coach, am I going to be able to play? And I said, listen, I'm going to get the film, and we're going to petition the state to reinstate him, basically.
I remember when I asked Pooh, what are you guys doing tonight? He said, oh, we're going to go over to the Boys and Girls Club in Belgrade to a dance. And I was like, all right, well, you guys stay together and be careful.
They had a dance in Belgrade, a Pahokee homecoming dance in Belgrade, because I'm so used to them having a homecoming dance in Pahokee. I don't know why they had it like that, but they did.
Pahokee is only 10 miles away from Belgrade, and both of those schools are rivalry schools. Like in every sport, I don't care if it's swimming, you know, throwing rocks down the street, you know, it's a rivalry. Somebody's got to beat somebody.
Him and DJ was together. I said, y'all be careful and be safe and just come back home. You know, at a decent hour. Don't be out too late.
And he said, I'll see you tomorrow. And he gave me a smile and a big hug, and he walked away. And that was our last conversation.
we arrived to the homecoming dance. We park and we see people hanging outside. The Boy and Girl Club. And then when we got to the door, the people at the door was like, the party is about to get over. We was just talking to my friend, Oscar Blake. And we stood there for 5, 10 minutes, no more, no less. You had a couple of people, hanging along on the side of the road, across the street, people standing by their cars. I've noticed like this little short guy running back and forth across the street. And I was like, hey man, y'all, I got a funny vibe. I think it's time for us we need to go. Me and Pooh got inside of his mom Durango, and Oscar, Blake, and a couple of the other guys, they got inside Oscar's car. That's when you kind of like heard the shots go to firing off like firecrackers. I heard multiple gunshots, not just 5, 6. I'm talking almost 20. Pooh hopped on top of me and told me to duck. He let go of the steering wheel, and before you know it, we hit the pole that was across the street from us. And when I looked up, I see Pooh, he was looking like he was in pain. Like, you could tell he was hurting. He was saying, like, he was fading away. At the same time, I'm shocked. I'm 17, never seen nothing like this in my life. And when I got out the car, Oscar's car pulled back up on side of us, and I fainted.
Pahokee is a small town that is located on Lake Okeechobee. It's a farming community, very close knit, very rich in athletes. Football is huge in Pahokee.
The area out there is called Muck City because of the soil. It's black, it's rich.
We grow a lot of things out in the mug, including football players.
During burning season for sugarcane, the farmers burn the cane, and during that process, the rabbits start coming out. And so the chasing of the rabbits is kind of a rite of passage. The old adage is that, they chase the rabbits, and that's where our speed from the glades comes from.
Norman caught a lot of rabbits. He did it for fun.
Typically, when you hear a young man say, I want to play in the NFL, you think, that's a pipe dream. That's, shooting for the sun and whatever. But a lot of our players have made the league. We have the big names, the Anquan Boldens, the Ricky Jacksons, and Janoris Jenkins.
Pooh used to always talk about he's going to play for the Miami Dolphins. He's seen these guys from Pahokee play on the next level. He was dedicated to say, I'm going to do it too.
Pooh played football for his family. He wanted to get us from the ghetto. That was his goal. Football was his ticket out.
Norman Griffith was seated in the driver's seat. His head was tilted towards the driver's window. There was blood on his shirt and blood from a head wound. It was pretty obvious that he had been shot in the head. The deputies performed CPR until the medics responded. They in turn immediately transported Norman Griffith to Delray Community Hospital.
We thought, a night of excitement, enjoying the fact that we won homecoming. It ended up being a tragedy. I didn't make it home with my friend, my best friend.
We canvassed the scene where the shooting occurred. It was evident 2 firearms had been fired. We located approximately 11 shell casings on the ground. Some were of the .380 caliber and some were of the .40 caliber, which is a much larger handgun and caliber than the .380. It did appear as though this was a targeted shooting. It became evident that this investigation was going to be a complicated one because there were so many people that witnessed the shooting, but no one knew who the shooters are. And we were going to have to figure out what they saw and what they could tell us.
I'm driving, and I get a call from one of my players, Oscar, and it was just life altering. Kuzma shot. What do you mean Kuzma shot? Coach got shot in the head. Is he alive? Is he breathing? Is what I mean, a million things run through your head. And I finally I remember asking, has anybody called his mom?
He wasn't gone 15 minutes. And they called me and told me he had got shot. He just got shot. They told me I had to go to the hospital. I was so afraid. We was in the waiting area. Detective came out. Say he didn't make it. He didn't make it. It looked like my heart just dropped. Because I lost one of my flowers. And I know I would never see him again.
I got a phone call from my mom saying that we needed to come to the hospital. And when I got there, he was gone. He was gone. He was only 17 and he had a life ahead of him.
When I found out he was deceased, like, this can't be happening. Like, the last words he had with his mom, his last football game. Like, this can't be happening.
Anybody who saw Pooh thought he's in high school. Look at his beard. But you meet the kid, you see him smile. It's heartwarming. We had him over a number of times, and I vividly remember one evening, my daughter's crying. She's 2 years old. I just remember him taking the initiative, going down the hallway, picking her up, and just walking around, basically distracting her for whatever reason she was crying, and just calming her down. When you get to know Norman, you knew that he was a kid you could trust. He was a good kid.
Detectives were able to gather up and separate witnesses that actually saw the shooting and conducted interviews with those people.
You know a little bit. Can you tell me what you know or what happened? Or?
Only thing I can really tell you is that I took him to the dance because I thought it was going to be a school dance. And after the guards were standing out there, they pat him down before they go in. So I stand across the street on the corner because I stay like 1 block from the dance. About 10 minutes to 1, I heard something say boom, 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 and I'm standing up out there. So I freaking run toward the where they were shooting at because I knew I had my boy in the dance and I was going to get him. So he had them broken run the opposite way because he was ready to shoot. Now I said, I'm going home right now. And then so I went to go home. Boom, 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 boom. We just running.
What happened to him?
We had just left our football game, and we came over here to the party.
Okay, then what happened?
And then we came outside the party, and I seen Norman Grisham. We talking with all of them. We was joking and jiving about the game.
Okay.
The witnesses said that they observed a group of young men standing across the street from where the Dodge Durango was parked, and several people stated that they were acting suspicious.
I was passing by, and this boy, he had on a black bandana around his mouth.
Numerous people told us that they saw one young male who was short in stature and had dreadlocks, and there was another fellow that had a black T-shirt on and had a black bandana over his face.
And I heard him pull back the gun, and he said, "Man, I'm about to do this."
You have to pull a slide back and it makes that noise.
It's like,
yeah.
And they was laughing after the gunshot. They was standing there laughing. Then they got in. Then they rolled out.
There's a strong rivalry between Belglade and Pahokee, particularly with the football teams. And the theory was discussed as to whether or not Norman Griffith was he shot for that reason because he was a football player and was very well known in the community.
There has been violence between the cities. I had a couple of players tell me a couple of weeks before that they were in Belgrade and that they had been threatened. And the threat was, you guys play for Pahokee. Y'all better get out of here. There have been turf battles. You don't think of murder, though. Most of the time, it's they're fighting or whatever.
As a football player, everybody knew who you was. You pretty much didn't have to worry about nobody really like shooting at you or trying to fight you or things like that.
They are the stars of the community. They are the hope for the future. It was like unbelievable, almost. Like you just couldn't wrap your mind around it. There were a lot of people that were there who witnessed it, and a lot of people who wanted to see justice. They saw this as an innocent kid who had the potential to be something big and to do well in life, who was taken. Rumors and gossip spreads in small communities very, very easily. There were definitely a lot of conversations going on, right? And people asking me, why did this happen? Why would somebody do this? I just wanted it to be known that he wasn't a bad kid, that he was a good kid, and that this was a terrible, terrible tragedy, not something that happened because of some other issues.
This will be rushed to PBS location 08128821. Did you see any Belgrade football players in the dance?
Did you see any Pahokee football players in there?
Were they kind of hanging with the Belgrade football players? The Pahokee football players in Belgrade? It's a good dance.
And it was good until the end, till getting over and started shooting. I don't call that good.
No, not at all.
You know, who would want to kill him?
And where'd you notice these boys at?
Those 4 boys standing on the corner.
What were they dressed in?
They was dressed in black.
Now, have you ever seen those boys before?
No,
Didn't you see the shooter?
no, I jumped down in his feet.
Do you have any idea what this could be over?
No, no, not really. Because we are guys that don't get in trouble.
Could it be over a girl?
There was a rumor that they was saying that it was over a girl. But
What girl?
all I know her name was that's the name that they were calling. They say she was imported with another guy.
So who's the guy she was with?
I don't know.
What did it look like?
She's about 5'7", dark skin.
Do you know where she goes to school?
Actually, she's a that's how she's a cheerleader.
When people told us that it may have been over a girl, of course, that's common where, hormones are starting to develop in these young men and young girls. Could it have been over a girl? That's the million-dollar question.
18-year-old Norman Griffith is seen here wearing number 43. The team had just won its homecoming matchup against Jupiter High just hours before Griffith was murdered. Griffith's cousin and fellow teammate Tommy Gilbert was heartbroken after hearing the horrible news.
He was just right beside me. We was talking after the game, and we went our separate ways.
An autopsy was performed. The medical examiner recovered a .380 projectile that was removed from Pooh's head. We knew that that's the type of caliber of the firearm that killed him, but we didn't have any names to go on at that time.
What does everybody say?
Like, they got a bunch of stories. They like, the girl named Simon.
How long you been dating? 3 years.
She was like on and off, but we were still going together. They think I had something when that was my boyfriend, and I looked at him.
Well, y'all dating each other now?
You know,
Is there a possibility that it might be over a girl?
so I don't think so.
Several people told us that this may be over an ex-girlfriend of Pooh's, but none of those theories proved to be anything substantial. We have a tip line, and we received several calls that a guy by the name of Willie Felton might be involved in this case.
Can you just again go into the whole background of why you were there and what happened that night?
Okay. I was there as the security, because it was first for security. The story broke. And it was shocking to me that I recognized one of the suspects. And the suspect I recognized was Wilfeld Jr. At 1 o'clock, when the lights was come on, he walked right in front of me, leading us to the jail.
We received a call from Willie Felton's mother. She went to Glade Central and pulled him out of school because he was being threatened. And the reason he was being threatened is because people were saying that he had something to do with the killing of Pooh.
Shirley, all right? I called the police all last night. They've been threatening my son.
Hey man, what's going on? Take this sniff. Where?
When we first interviewed Willie Felton, his parents were present, and we learned that his nickname is Man Man. On first glance, when we first talked to Willie, we noted immediately that he matched the description of the shorter male at the shooting scene.
What makes somebody think you were there?
Oh no, were you there? I wasn't there Friday night. I was asleep.
My son can't even play football.
Why is that?
They said they're going to shoot and kill him.
Oh, he's on the football team?
He's a quarterback.
He's a quarterback for
Yeah.
Bell
Like Central.
We invited them to come to the sheriff's office, and they maintained his innocence, that he had nothing to do with the shooting and the killing.
I don't know what you're talking about, cause this boy, he was asleep. He was dead asleep.
Were you there that night? No. Where were you at? I was at the house beside the bed.
He told us he went to another town, a town called Clewiston, Florida, for a football game. He returned home from the football game in Clewiston and went to bed.
I'll be honest with you. Some people said you were involved with the shooting. Crime Stoppers was ringing your name left and right for being responsible for this. Why would people say you were involved in this?
He then changed his story. This time he told us that after he went to the football game in Clewiston, he returned to Belglade, where he ended up at the dance. I think he figured out that we knew that he was present at the shooting scene.
I left the gym by 10:45, 11:05, something like that.
He was home. He was home.
Brother, I gotta tell you, man. I hope you were.
Yeah, he was home.
Okay. All of it is. So I can arrange a lie detector test now.
Right now, I take it. Right now. Right now.
Willie Felton volunteered to take a polygraph that was set up for him to take place on the following day. When he came into the sheriff's office to take the lie detector test, we knew we had probable cause to arrest him for the murder report. They never took the polygraph.
You're now under arrest.
He arrested me murder.
You understand that?
He's trying to take my life. He's trying to take my life. He's trying to first-degree murder.
You ain't gonna be charged with it. You ain't gonna be charged with that.
It was kind of confusing. Why the hell did he shoot Griffith? But Willie Felton was maintaining his innocence the whole time, and he wasn't talking to us. It was evident 2 firearms had been fired. We were certain that we were looking for at least 2 people, Willie Felton and another fellow that was also shooting. It was important that we find out who this guy really was. That was huge to us.
The Blue Devils are scheduled to play on national TV next weekend, but Coach Thompson says if the game conflicts with Griffith's funeral, it will not be played.
By Monday, we've got to make a decision. Personally, I was leaning on forfeiting. Not because I didn't think the boys needed to play or the boys needed to get back to normalcy, but in my mind, it's how do we get our focus back on football if our focus is still on grieving?
The guys thought that I was gonna have the funeral the week that they was gonna go to South Carolina. They wanted to forfeit the game, and when Coach told me that, I said, "Oh no!" I said, "Who wouldn't like that?" I wait till them come back. I said, "Y'all go ahead on and play the game."
We match up Pahokee High School from near West Palm Beach, Florida.
Our team was sponsored by Nike, and Nike made flight arrangements so that Pooh's parents could join us.
While we was in South Carolina, the team we played showed major love to his mom. They also they may have felt like we was home.
You walk on the field and you see the 7 painted on the grass, and you get chills.
And my cousin's son, he wore his jersey in the game. And even though they was hurting and they was in Mona, they still went up there and played. And it was a beautiful game.
Final score maybe 38-12. So officially, Pahokee loses the game. It's not on my mind they have won. An emotional victory for them, overcoming the loss of Norman Griffith.
The funeral was held at the gymnasium at the high school. The gym was packed with people. Packed.
So I had the whole community there that supported me. Near and far they came from.
It was overwhelming with emotions. These kids are 17 years old, 18 years old, burying their friend. He was just starting life, right? And he had great things on the horizon.
We were concerned about Jackie not getting justice, Norman not getting justice. So that's kind of where we were as a town after.
In speaking with the family, we learned more about Pooh, the type of kid that he was, a good kid. In those kind of cases, when an innocent victim is shot and killed, it becomes kind of like a personal matter. And we told the family that we would do our best to find out who was responsible for murdering Pooh. We received information from another detective that he was investigating an individual by the name of Lee Franklin Jones. Jones was arrested at his home, and during the arrest, they recovered a .380 caliber pistol. Once we recovered the firearm at Lee Franklin Jones's home, we sent that .380 to the Sheriff's Office Ballistics Division. They compared the firearm to the casings that were recovered on the ground and the projectile recovered at autopsy, and we were advised that it was a match, and we now had our murder weapon. When Lee Franklin Jones was arrested, he volunteered to us that he had information regarding Pooh's murder. We interviewed Lee Franklin Jones, and he told us that he was an eyewitness to Pooh's shooting and murder. They actually intended on robbing a guy by the name of Boss, Oscar Blake, who was parked directly in front of Pooh. And it was their intention to go and rob Boss of the necklace that he was wearing. He told us that he saw two shooters, and he named one of the shooters as Willie Felton, also known as Man Man.
Man, like on the side, like with a twist for so he started. I heard 3 gunshots at her.
And he named the guy with the street name of CJ.
CJ right there, on the street, trying to get his name. Yeah.
No one knew who CJ was. No one had ever heard of that name before, and we really wanted to find out.
The only thing is CJ. He's a runner. I guess it was just like whatever he had to do to get down, he was willing to do it.
Jones told us that after the murder of Pooh had occurred, CJ came to his home and told him and confessed to him that it was him and Man Man that were the shooters, and they were responsible for Pooh's murder. The case is starting to meld together. The only problem we have to do now is figure out who's CJ. We started to develop photo lineups of possible suspects.
It's a photograph lineup. Okay, 6 pictures on the page. Tell me if you see anybody that you know, anybody you recognize. Take your time. Don't feel obligated, but be honest. Okay?
Willie Felton was arrested for this murder. We had several people that were talking about this guy CJ as one of the shooters. So now our next goal is to see is if we can get a positive identification of the shooter
Yeah, CJ. That's the person that shot the other gun?
CJ.
Number 2?
CJ.
Can you circle that?
And it was at that moment that we knew that we had definitely identified CJ as a young man by the name of Carl Booth from Pahokee, Florida.
The moment I found out that CJ was Carl Booth Jr., it felt like a stab in my heart. Carl Booth was my god brother, church brother. I thought he was a family member. Like, he could have been up there.
TJ, he used to come to my house just about every Sunday after church. Him and Pooh played together. Pooh tried to teach him how to play football.
When I heard that Carl was arrested, it was a shock, more so because I knew that Carl and Norman knew each other. Carl and Pooh had been friends, you know.
And my thing is, you knew that was my car. You knew that was Pooh. And you shot him.
We located Carl Booth and his dad in Pahokee, and we invited them to come to the sheriff's office substation in Belgrade, Florida.
So I told you ran away from home. What happened then with that?
Let's see, you know, take some time, go to bed, later, sit in my mind.
Booth told us that he was present at the dance.
I seen Pooh across the thing.
You see Pooh? Who's Pooh? Okay.
Everybody's implementing you as a shooter. And I'm not in the sugarcoat it, I'm telling you straight up. They say you was the shooter.
They kept telling me, you want that chunk, man. You want that chunk, man.
Meaning what?
The necklace. They had a big necklace on. They kept telling me, I want you to bust. Go ahead, bust that. I was like, man, I don't want to do this.
Then what's up? Willie Felton, I don't even know this dude. Willie break out of there.
In speaking with Booth, he readily admitted that he was firing in the direction of Pooh's vehicle.
What I thought was somebody shooting at me. So we shot back. Right. I took off. And as I was shooting, you heard it go pop, pop, pop. And as I'm running, I'm just letting it go. And that was in car through it under the seat.
He definitely incriminated himself as a principal in the murder of this young man.
I felt like if I ain't tell somebody, I was gonna die from it. You got a good heart.
At this point in the investigation, it's rapidly coming to an end because Carl Booth and Willie Felton have been identified as the shooters. When one asks why they committed this crime, one can speculate that it was to get street cred, something like that. But at the end of the day, all we can do as police officers is follow the evidence and see if we can develop enough evidence to identify the persons responsible for the killing. But after a lot of investigation, the state of Florida elected to drop the charges on Willie Felton.
If somebody was involved that didn't get prosecuted, then is that really justice?
I'm aware that people in the community feel very strongly that Willie Felton was responsible for Pooh's death, but every case has to pass the scrutiny of the prosecutors when it comes into this building, and sometimes cases do get dropped. On October 3rd, 2008, Carl Booth was placed under arrest for first-degree murder and attempted robbery.
Griffith was being recruited by several big-time college football programs when he was gunned down. And right now in this courthouse behind me, a jury is deciding if Carl Booth Jr. is the person responsible for pulling that trigger.
Carl Booth was convicted of first-degree murder and attempted robbery and sentenced to life in prison in the Department of Corrections. His first-degree murder conviction was reduced to a term of 25 years, and he's eligible for release in 2032.
It's a relief that they found the person that did it and he got sentenced to it, but it still hurts. It still hurts.
Pooh meant a lot to me. I never forget him. No matter how far I go in life, I will never forget him. And I just want to thank him for saving my life. Number 7 forever will be a special number. You know, that's my lucky number. It was amazing that we won the state title that year. We was 3-piece state title. The first to do it at Polk High.
But it just, it's like almost like we couldn't enjoy it, couldn't, without him.
I was happy for the team. They still gave me a jacket. They gave me his ring.
Pooh's loss to the school, the town, was enormous. Immediately, we retired his jersey, his number. It was a shame to lose a young man with the potential he had, the kind of character he had, the kind of young man he was.
You never get over losing a son, even though it's been over 13 years. The pain is still there.
Penn State football, it's hard to even describe unless you are there. It is your team, your university, your college. It's just awesome.
Back then, there could be 65, 66,000 people. With the energy from the people stomping on those metal stands, you get hyped.
Joe Paterno's football players to the students were God. They walked on water. Players could do just about anything they wanted to. And then the attacks started happening. The most challenging part of dealing with this serial rapist was knowing that he's out there and that some other victim might be brutalized before we catch him.
I heard somebody coming up behind me. I kind of figured I'm dead.
Something didn't go right. There are victims as a result.
Nobody said anything. Nobody did anything. They basically covered it up.
Wasn't it enough to rape me?
Long Island it's a nice place to live for sure. There's a lot of water if you like water. The best part of growing up on Long Island, basically family and friends, just like any place else that you would live. Simple, just simple life. I was 20 at the time. I was out jogging and I would run from my house up to the high school and I would run home. And so the night of the incident, I heard somebody coming up behind me. It was a guy, and I just turned around and kept walking, just thinking, oh, it's just somebody else on the street. And then he ran up and held his hand over my mouth so I couldn't scream. I remember him saying something like, do you feel this? And it was the knife first in my ribs and then to my throat. And he said, if you don't do what I say, I'm going to use it. He obviously wanted to get me into the woods. I was trying to buy time, not quite knowing what to do. I kept dropping. I'd get up and then I'd drop, like maybe take a couple of steps and then I'd drop again. He dragged me probably about 20 feet in. We used to play in those woods when we were growing up. The same woods. He used the string from my sweatpants to tie my hands behind my back. And then at that point, I kind of figured I'm dead. And he raped me. And I told him that my father was a police officer and that if I didn't get home on time, my father's going to come looking for me. And with that, he stopped. And I heard him run off. After a little bit, I don't know how many minutes, it was all a blur. I got up. I had no shoes on. And I just took off and I ran home as fast as I could. And when I got home, I told my father I was raped. He totally freaked out. He went upstairs and got his gun. And he said, retrace your steps. We got to the edge of the woods and he said, we don't need to go in. My mom went with me to the hospital. My father stayed behind. Had he found that guy, he probably would have killed him.
Nassau County Police are hunting for a man who sexually assaulted a Bethpage woman last night in these woods adjacent to John F. Kennedy Middle School.
I just remember he had blonde hair and he was a huge guy, like really, really big guy. The Nassau County Police Department definitely put a lot more time and attention into the case because my father was a police officer. He told them, you find this guy first or he's a dead man. And so they hopped on it. And my father was working it. He was working it the whole time. I mean, he went out every day and every night looking for this guy. But at that point, I had no idea. There were so many other women before me. So many other women were raped.
Penn State was known as Happy Valley and still is today one of the greatest places in the United States, in my opinion. The whole atmosphere of the community changes in football season.
I have no idea why they call it Happy Valley. Never really cared, but I just know it was such power, fan support. It was just electrifying, man. Great to go out and perform in front of that many people every game, no matter who we played. Packed.
Joe Paterno obviously was the head coach for many, many years at Penn State. He was well known and well respected within the community. The football team controlled most of the money controlled big money, millions. And of course, Joe was in charge of that. Joe Paterno was extremely influential on campus. The football players to the students were God. They walked on water. Players could do just about anything they wanted to.
I went in to Penn State as a junior and was able to go to my very first football game. It was the most amazing thing I had ever seen. It's hard to even describe unless you are there. It is your team, your university, your college. It's just awesome.
I would say my best memory of Penn State football had to be going 11-0 that season. It was just growing, just the excitement, the energy was enormous. We were gelling as a group of young men, and everybody's holding up their end of the bargain. It was a magical year because no matter what, we found a way to win those football games.
Joe Paterno ran a tight ship. His athletes were always suited with tie, well spoken if they were in front of the media, and I just felt that nobody would do anything bad. These were really good people that I just admired tremendously. In my senior year, I put an ad in the Daily Collegian about a roommate. I specifically said female wanted. I had a phone call from a fellow that said his girlfriend needed a place to stay. So I gave him a little spiel about how wonderful my place was and where it was. Then I had to go out, stayed a little longer than I thought, but came back, and I went back into my bedroom and turned the light on. It just didn't work. And the next thing I know, I had a hand over my mouth and a knife poking in my neck, and a voice saying, "If you make a sound, I will kill you." He began tying me up, also then put a scarf and tied that over my face. And he picked me up. He was quite strong. It was, a dead lift. And threw me down and began to rape me. I was aware of any time he was coming and going and heard some things moving around. I saw the corner of his jeans. I saw his shoes. I saw his thumb. So I knew he was white. And that was about a 2-hour ordeal. This was happening, but it wasn't going to happen to me in my soul. Eventually, he left, and I called the police. And I had a police officer that was so kind and so gentle, and I was so afraid that I was going to forget something. And he said, "Slow down." And I told him I'm going to forget something, and he said, "You won't." He said, "It will come back. It's there. It will come back. You won't forget it."
Oftentimes, when sex crimes were reported to the police department, they would get publicized a day in the local paper, and that would be the end of it. But then we learned that after Betsy was attacked, there were other attacks on other women, just similar MOs, maybe making it the same perpetrator. I had a driving force that I was going to get the SOB somehow. I sometimes get teased that I'm a dog after a bone. My drive to get him, not questionable. I knew he was a bad person, but I didn't realize how bad he was. And we had no idea what's coming next. When Betsy was attacked, the officer took the initial report and processed the crime scene. And then the case was given to me. We had no suspect. We had no idea who had attacked Betsy.
I've spent over 45 years in law enforcement now, and this is one of the most serious crimes that I've ever been a part of investigating. The most serious rape, and one that I hope nobody ever has to go through again. When the victim come home, the bedroom light was up. So we realized that it's highly probable that the attacker had unscrewed that light bulb. We think there's fingerprints on it. We were not going to touch that light bulb. So we took the entire fixture to preserve that evidence.
At one point, they said, "Is this yours?" And I looked and it was a knife. And I said, "No, that's not mine."
Through the interview of Betsy, we learned that he had rummaged through her medicine cabinet. Items from the medicine cabinet were submitted to the FBI. The knife was submitted to the FBI. And the light bulb was submitted to the FBI for fingerprints. The police department was subsequently told by the FBI that they had removed 3 prints of value, meaning that those 3 prints could be compared to someone. But it's conceivable that the person who attacked Betsy has never had his fingerprints taken. And if that's the case, they don't exist in any database that the FBI has access to.
The most challenging part of dealing with this serial rapist was worrying about another victim until we caught him, stopping it, knowing that he's out there and that some other victim might be brutalized before we catch him.
I think about the possibility of the attacker killing the next victim. That's what he was threatening to do.
At that point, it was my responsibility to give as much information as possible and to participate in the process that assisted the police in locating this person.
We tried to find out if there were other ads of similarity that were answered. And a male responded, but we never had any luck. And then came another call. There was a young Penn State student named Susan who called our police department in regards to her getting harassing phone calls. An officer was interviewing Susan, and she made the statement that the phone calls were such that, "Did you like it? Would you like me to do it again?" She says, "The person who's calling me is also the person who raped me." And the officer said, "What?" "I was raped by the same person that called me, but I never reported it to the police." When Susan told me the details of her attack, It was exactly MO-wise, just like Betsy. The attacker had blindfolded Susan, had threatened her with a knife, and tied her hands. But also, both Susan and Betsy had placed ads in the newspaper for roommates. Both of those girls had gotten a call saying that my girlfriend's looking for a place to live. I'd like to look at your apartment. Susan was attacked several weeks prior to we learning about it. So by that time, there would be no evidence. There would be no semen, no blood. Her clothes have been washed. I mean, she was washed. There's nothing to be had. It had never been reported, so it was never in the paper. I believe he figured he was home scot-free. But Susan told her father about the harassing phone calls. And her father worked for Bell Telephone. Her father was able to get a trace on her phone. The father obtained information as to where the source of the calls were coming from, which was a dorm room on Penn State campus. We were able to determine from Penn State records that there were 2 football players living in that room. One was Fred Ricucci and one was Todd Hodney.
It was crazy. We knew those guys, and we were teammates. There was that camaraderie.
Earlier that summer, a couple of football players burglarized a record store. The police officers who responded caught 1 or 2 of the burglars. One got away. Soon thereafter, Todd Hodney came to the police station looking for his friends who had been arrested. There was a police officer there who recognized him as the one who ran away from the burglary. And so Todd was eventually charged with that burglary.
Todd Hodney is a year younger. Todd was a big kid, worked hard, didn't back down from anybody. He was a straightforward guy at that point. I didn't have anything bad to say about him. But after that break-in, he got suspended. They honored his scholarship, but he was suspended from the football team.
But when he had been arrested, he was fingerprinted. We immediately asked the FBI to compare Todd Hodney's fingerprints to the 3 fingerprints they had gotten from Betsy's attacker.
And I called down to the FBI Academy to have them compare those 2. And when they called back and said it was a match, as I about blew the roof off of the police station, I was so excited. Everybody was just so wanting to stop this and get this guy.
When those 3 fingerprints came back as being Todd Hodney's, we had our man. There was no doubt about it. One of the officers contacted Joe Paterno and asked him where was Todd Hodney and told him that we had a warrant for his arrest. Todd was apparently at that time home in the New York area or Long Island. When we contacted Joe Paterno, I think it was towards the weekend, and Joe said he would try and find him. And when he told us that he would try and find Todd Hodney, I assumed that he would do that. But during that time, I was thinking that Todd was a dangerous individual. If he attacks again, that might escalate into a homicide, a murder.
My boyfriend at the time told me they found the guy. And I screamed, yes, like as loud as I possibly could. And I was told that he was a Penn State football player, which absolutely shocked me. Just like, no, that couldn't possibly be.
I didn't believe it. It was just hearsay. Back then, it was sexual assault was more he said, she said. We didn't think he was, that type of person who raped somebody.
Joe Paterno said he would try and find Todd Hodney. And my guess is that Joe himself got an attorney for Todd, and the attorney told Todd, get your buns down there and turn yourself in. And then came Monday, and he turned himself in to be arrested. They want no bad publicity. That was obvious in the Jerry Sandusky case. Penn State will do whatever they can to create a wonderful image of Penn State with no issues anywhere.
It surprises me that perpetrators like this, like Sandusky, are allowed to continue when people know. And that angers me. It concerns me that in some places we have the fox in charge of the hen house. Surely somebody knew or should have known.
Todd was a big man. To play linebacker at Penn State, you've got to have some size to you and some muscle to you. So I guess you can describe Todd as being intimidating. For Betsy's attack, Todd said he was at a party at a fraternity with his football friends. But when we questioned his alibi witnesses, there was no one that could place him at that fraternity the entire time. With the knife, Todd had said when questioned that knife was his, but it had been stolen from him.
He said there must be some kind of innocent explanation for the fingerprints to be there, but never quite explained how. He claimed he was innocent, had nothing to do with the attack.
My involvement in the case was really pretty peripheral until they made the arrest. And I've got to start preparing for a preliminary hearing. Really is only to establish that a crime was committed and that this individual may have done it. During that time, I contacted Betsy Saylor to tell her that she would testify, that it was open to the public. I told her I didn't know, but I expected that there would be a number of big football players there attempting to either intimidate her or at least sway her in some form or another.
It was one of the biggest cases that I remember. It was Happy Valley. And when something like this happens, everybody, even though Detective Muster was assigned, everybody was paying attention.
A carload of us went to show support. It wasn't a show of trying to intimidate the witness or anything like that. I just wanted to go because he was part of our group.
There were football players. I wasn't sure who they were. I just knew that there were a lot of bigger framed people that were kind of peppered through this audience, but they needed to hear it and I needed to say it.
Todd Hodney, and a defense attorney who was a previous All-American football player for Joe Paterno, he considered himself a big shot because he played for Joe and he knew all the connections.
The preliminary hearing started, and as I was talking about things that I had noticed while I was laying there on the bed, I noticed his thumb and I noticed his sneakers, which were an unusual color. They were suede and they were Puma brand.
Todd, he wore those blue Pumas, and in fact, he had them on that day, and that was the moment when she started talking about those blue shoes. Like, whoa, that's the moment that hit me. My mind was kind of changed at that point. It was like, okay, she may be telling the truth.
The longer she was up there, the stronger she got. She was able to testify factually. She didn't break down. She didn't act like she was being intimidated by these, big gentlemen, looking at her. She never faltered. The next step is that we go to trial.
After the preliminary hearing, Todd's family had him out on bail.
Before the trial, Penn State wanted me to stay in a dormitory for my safety. And shortly after the preliminary hearing, there was a knock at my dorm room door, and I opened it up, and it was the biggest man that I had ever seen. And he just introduced himself. Hello, my name is Irv Pankey, and I just wanted to let you know that I believed every word that you said, and you won't have to be alone or afraid.
I cannot tell you why to this day I went and knocked on her door. But I just knew she needed a friend. I just knew she needed someone to say it was going to be okay.
On March 1st, 1979, the trial began.
My main focus in this trial was the fingerprints, but I had to establish that the only way those fingerprints could have ever been put there was during the time of the crime. But I just remember thinking, this thing could still go south.
As the trial concluded and the jury went back for deliberation, there was just a tremendous amount of anxiety, fear. Were we convincing enough? The minutes seemed like hours, and the hours seemed like days.
One of the longest periods in a trial attorney's life is when the jury stands up and you're waiting for guilty or not guilty. Did I worry during that time? I always worried until I hear the verdict. Once they said guilty, you're thinking, they got it. It's right, he's guilty, and they said it.
The police immediately rushed over, scooped me up, and threw me in a patrol car. I think they were concerned about what Todd would do. I knew that he would be sentenced because I knew that we had won, but I wasn't sure exactly what his sentence would be or how long. I didn't know enough about the logistics of what was happening.
But most often, when someone is convicted of a serious crime such as the rape, the judge will immediately revoke his bail and incarcerate him. When Hodney was convicted of Betsy's rape, that was not the case. He was never incarcerated. The judge turned him loose. The judge left him return with his family pending a pre-sentence investigation. He did not revoke his bail. Don't know why. I mean, for you or I, the judge would have immediately put you in prison. I can speculate that it had something to do with who he was, football player, Penn State, Joe Paterno. I don't know. But there had to be a reason that the judge did that, because that was totally out of the norm.
When we heard that Rodney had been released and had gone back to New York, we were all upset, and particularly myself personally. And I was very concerned that he was going to continue doing the same thing.
He got away with things because he was a big shot football player. They didn't want Hodney to taint the whole status of the football team, so they basically covered it up. Had they been more serious on the Penn State campus, the rapes on Long Island would not have happened. I was a cheerleader in high school. If you were on the cheerleading team, you were one of the popular ones. It's like people would come up to me and say, "Oh, you're Barbara Johnson," and I'd be like, "Who are you?" Everybody knew me, and it was just the way that it was.
On Long Island at this time, it wasn't Friday night football. It all took place on Saturdays or Sundays. There was a lot of excitement. We had a lot of pride in what we did.
Yeah, when there was a football game, there were a lot of people in the stands. So I guess it was, a pretty much a community thing. It was just everybody would come out and watch the games, and we'd cheerlead and we'd go home. My parents are very strict, my father particularly, which is kind of ironic because he protected people every day when he went to work, but yet he couldn't protect me in that moment in time.
A week before the attack on Barbara Johnson, homeowner Georgette Perkle hears a knock on the door. There's a young man there who says he's looking for volunteer coaches. And she lets him in, at which point he rips the cord out of the phone, uses it to tie up her 73-year-old mother. While the suspect is raping Georgette, her mother breaks free and runs outside, and the assailant chases after her. That gives Georgette the opportunity to escape. It was an extremely violent attack.
A couple of weeks later, there was a sketch of this person in the Oyster Bay Guardian. It didn't ring any bells when I looked at it, but we were closely watching the news. We were hoping that this person would be arrested.
A month after Barbara Johnson's attack, 15 miles southwest of Oyster Bay, there was a sixth incident. This time it was different. A 16-year-old girl home by herself. Somebody knocks on the door. He says his name is Tom Harris and says his company is offering free paint jobs. The young lady says her parents are not at home. The man asks if he can come in for a drink of water, and she lets him in. At which point, he threatens her with a knife, threatens to rape her, and when she resists, he threatens to kill her, and she says, "I'd rather be dead." Eventually, she raises such a fuss that he ties her up and leaves. She managed to get out the front door, and a neighbor across the street is a New York City cop, pursues and arrests him. He was questioned for several days, and finally talks about all the attacks, and eventually admits his real name.
I was sitting down at dinner, and the news came on, and I saw a picture of Todd Hodney. I pretty much almost fell on the floor. I went to school with him at St. Dominic's. I met Todd Hodney in 1973 in the summer tryouts for St. Dominic's freshman team in Oyster Bay, Long Island. I always described Todd as running like a bull. Todd was all about football. He thought he was a great teammate. He was driven. He was motivated. That evening, my parents were with me, and we just started thinking about how many times, he was in our house. My parents are always amazed on how many pancakes and French toast he could consume in one sitting, and he was always respectful to my parents. I was hearing about 5 rapes on Long Island. I just didn't know that he was capable of doing anything like that. I said to myself, what the hell may have happened? The coaches at St. Dominic's saw a very bright future for Todd Hodney. And schools from North Carolina, Syracuse, and Pittsburgh became very interested in Todd, including Penn State. We graduated in '77. Todd had gone to Penn State on some type of scholarship. Penn State was in the top 10. and Joe Paterno had an excellent reputation at that time as being a head coach. It was a year later, I heard that Todd either was asked to leave or he was expelled from Penn State with no reason, just that things didn't work out. Now, according to the local news stations, Todd was being charged with 5 rapes throughout Nassau County. We never thought he would cross the line like that.
Six months after the conviction in Pennsylvania, Todd Hodney is back in court, this time on Long Island, charged in connection with all 5 of the rapes and the assault on the young girl. When he's at Penn State, he had been arrested for rape, convicted, and then released on bail awaiting sentencing, which allows him to come back to Long Island, and a month later he's creating this, at least 6 other attacks. This time, he's sentenced to 7 to 21 years in prison. Hodney serves 3 years in Pennsylvania and then serves 4 years in New York. He serves the minimum sentence. The parole board unanimously grants him his parole, so he's out of prison after 7 years. In 1986, he's released. He continues to do what he wants to do until August 11th of 1987, at which point he calls for a taxi, and Hodney tries to rob the cab driver and ends up strangling him, puts him in the hospital in critical condition, and dies several days later.
It didn't surprise me at all. This guy was a really bad guy. And I knew he was capable of murder. But nobody said anything. Nobody did anything. That's pretty typical of how things were, though, I think. I think that Paterno protected him because he was a football player.
Todd Hodney is tried and convicted by a jury and sentenced to 25 years to life in prison, where he dies of cancer when he was 61. It's surprising to me as a reporter that despite all the crimes he committed, nobody sort of put the whole big picture together.
Was that judge, in fact, influenced by the whole Penn State football machine? I don't know. Todd Hodney should not have been out. There are victims as a result. Wasn't it enough to rape me? Sometimes best friends cannot see each other for 30 years or what have you and pick up just where they left off. And that's kind of like what it was for Irv and I. And we've become quite close and have been spending more and more time together.
I've been married for 33 years. My wife had passed in 2020. So, after 40 years, so many things had to fall into place for us to reconnect.
After all this time, I have fallen in love. And Irv has fallen in love with me. He has always had a special place in my heart since he knocked on my door. And he will always be an angel to me. Everyone should have an Irv in their lives.